we'll go ahead and get started. And I'm sure there'll be some more folks joining us and logging on throughout the session. Welcome, as I said, everybody. I'm thrilled that you're here as part of our Estrella webinar series. I'll introduce myself just briefly. I'm Christina Dooley, and I am the owner and founder of Estrella Consulting, which is a full-service educational consulting business with consultants in multiple different states, working with students all around the world with all different abilities. And so we're really excited about this webinar tonight. This is being recorded, so if you're joining us live, great. You may also be watching this as a recording in the future. So if you are, welcome. We're glad to have you here. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest. Tonight we have Ferne Bork from Landmark College with us, and I met Ferne in the fall. We were very excited to host her as part of our admission representative visits that we were hosting with college representatives and school representatives from around the world. And Ferne and I had a great chat at that point in time, and she was so kind and generous to say, you know what, if in the future, if I can help with any of your students, or if I can serve as a resource on this process of navigating college and college search for students with diagnosed learning differences, I will be happy to do that. So I took her up on it. And so we're thrilled that she's here. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background information about Ferne, but she will share a lot more about herself during her chat as well. So Ferne is the Regional Enrollment Representative for Landmark College, and she's a mom of a student who has ADHD, which I think is so important in this conversation, Ferne, that you wear both of those hats. It was her journey with Aaron, her son, a Landmark alum, that brought her to her current position in admissions at the college after careers as an actress, musician, and in business. And I didn't know some of these things about you, friends, so I'm excited to learn more. But without further ado, I'll let you take it away. And again, if anyone has questions throughout, please go ahead and put them in the chat, and we will address them at the end or during if it's relevant at that time. So Ferne, go ahead.
Thank you, Christina, for such a lovely introduction. And thank you all for joining us here tonight. So just a little bit about how I'm going to structure the presentation. The bulk of it is all the general information I want you all to have about exactly how you navigate the search, what the legal landscape looks like, the tools to have in your toolkit, the information about different kinds of support structures. Want you to have all of that. And so that's the bulk of what I'm going to be sharing with you. And then, in about the last 10 or so minutes, I will share more specifically about Landmark so that you can see where a college like Landmark fits in the overall landscape I'll have been describing. So please, as Christina said, please ask lots of questions. It keeps it lively and dynamic. But if you have questions about Landmark specifically, if you would hold them until we get to that section and see whether it's already built into the presentation, that would be great. So before I share my slides, I want to tell you a little bit more about Aaron and about me. Aaron, my just turned 28-year-old son, is an extraordinary young man. Of course, I am his mother, and I feel that way. But Aaron has ADHD and all the executive function challenges that go along with that. And what that meant when he was in school was that he had no trouble taking in information. His challenge was in the area of output, homework, especially long-term assignments, but getting any homework done was really a challenge. So that kind of segues into who I am, or more specifically, who I was at the time. I consider myself to have been the quintessential helicopter mom. Before that expression had even been coined, that's who I was. And what that meant in our family was that when Aaron got home from school, I would sit him down. I would make sure the homework got done. The next day, I would try my best to make sure that the homework actually got turned in, which was also another part of the challenge. And as all of you who are family probably recognize, I also was his main advocate with the school system. There came a time, it was early in the year 2010, Aaron was a junior and he was starting to think about college. And I had this aha moment in which I recognized that by doing what I had done, I had actually become Aaron's executive functioning. And what that also meant was that he had had no opportunity to learn any on his own. And so, in that moment of realization, I also realized that he was going to need a very supportive college environment, which would help him develop the skills that he hadn't had an opportunity to develop at that point. So I dragged the family to a landmark open house. Drag is an appropriate word. And we sat in an auditorium of families that I immediately could tell were very much like our own. And I also knew immediately that we had found the perfect place for Aaron. Now, Aaron is as single-minded and as stubborn as his mom, and he also immediately knew that it was not the right place for him. And so, having lived with me for 17 years, he figured the best chance he had of getting what he wanted in the end was to create a compromise. So he decided to attend Landmark's summer program for high school students that July. Aaron, we call our Philadelphia lawyer because he was always, from the time he was little, presenting cases to us. And in this case, what I didn't know was he was going to Landmark only to prepare the case for why Landmark would be a terrible fit and why he would not be going. So it actually took me 9 years to find that out because, funny thing is, it didn't work. He got to Landmark that summer, found it to be an incredible experience to be somewhere where everyone got it. His peers got it, the faculty got it, the staff got it. And in those 3 weeks, he decided he was going to apply only to Landmark. So he came to Landmark in the fall of 2011 as a first-year student. In 2013, earned his associate's degree, and he transferred to American University. He has stayed down in DC and made his life there. By experiencing the journey of our whole family in those times and witnessing Aaron's journey very specifically, I came to an understanding of just how important it is, in particular for neurodiverse students, to find a great fit. Because for these students, it can mean the difference between success on the one hand, and on the other hand, turning their back entirely on college, making an incorrect assumption that they aren't cut out for it, when the fact is that more likely they aren't cut out for the particular college that they're attending. So out of what I learned from that journey and my desire to help other students and families going through the same experience, I have put together this information for you tonight. And so I am going to now share my screen with you and begin the slides. So as Christina said, we are talking about navigating the college search for students who learn differently. Oops, and that did not work. I want to go backwards. So excuse me, that was not graceful at all. And so I am going to unshare because I am not where I want to be. So I will begin, while I am waiting to get back to sharing, I will begin telling you about this Albert Einstein quote that I love so much. Albert Einstein said, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid." And I think that's just the way it is with many of our neurodiverse students. They compare themselves often, I think, and very often also unfavorably to their neurotypical peers, as though somehow they aren't as intelligent or aren't as capable. We know that nothing could be further from the truth. I think of them as square pegs who have been forced through much of their educational experience to fit into a round hole. So I want to encourage these students, excuse me, to approach the journey as the opportunity to find the square hole for the square peg. And it really does exist. It's really out there. While most people think of the college journey as being one of gathering information, I think it's also really important to recognize that this is an inner journey, a journey that students should be making towards greater self-awareness, towards self-discovery, and one in which they should be asking themselves a number of questions. Who am I? What do I want to gain from my college experience? What type of learner am I? You know, there are visual learners, auditory learners, and students who learn by doing. There are kinesthetic learners. It's important to recognize how you learn best. And not just how, but in what environment. Do you flourish in a small classroom, in a small, quiet environment? Also, students should reflect on what their strengths and weaknesses are. I think neurodiverse students spend a lot of time thinking about their challenges and their weaknesses, but it's important to really know your strengths, the very gifts that are going to help you meet those challenges that you're going to continue to be presented with. But perhaps the very most important questions to ask are, what accommodations and supports do I need that will best ensure my chances for success? So I want to paint a picture by the numbers. I think the data is really illuminating. 94% of students who have a learning difference receive some kind of support, some kind of assistance while they're in high school. And yet, only 17% of these students go on to utilize the resources that are available to them in college. Why? You know, there are many reasons. Probably chief among them are concern about stigma. And also, it's so much more difficult to access these resources in college than it was in high school. But when we look, I think, at the college outcomes, I think the results of this become very apparent. Nationwide, fewer than 60% of students, of all students trying to earn a bachelor's degree, actually succeed in earning it. But if you are a student who learns differently and you're in that group, only 34% go on to earn the degree that they're seeking. However, I don't share that data to be discouraging in any way, because you have control of the outcome. We know that students who access accommodations immediately and any other support services that they're seeking have a much greater chance of graduating. And on the other hand, studies show repeatedly that students who wait until their second year to request accommodations have 3.5 times the risk of not graduating within 6 years. So improve the odds, access and utilize supports. It's also important to be aware of the different kinds of support structures that exist in post-secondary education. I think of it as a pyramid, and at the very base of the pyramid are all 4,300 or so institutions of higher ed, all required by the Americans with Disabilities Act to provide access to students with disabilities by providing accommodations. Those accommodations may include things like extended time, reduced distraction environments, a note taker, educational technology, priority registration, reduced course load. But while the law mandates that accommodations must be provided, it doesn't say which. So if you're exploring one of the many institutions that simply provide accommodations, you need to be aware of which accommodations they provide. You'll also find differences in how easy or hard they are to access at different schools. Now, schools who provide only accommodations are what we consider in this hierarchy of support structures to be colleges that are in compliance and in compliance only with the ADA. But another subset of colleges and universities, in addition to providing accommodations, even though that's where their focus genuinely is, they will provide some additional kinds of services. So it may be study skills, it may be writing and math labs, some coaching. What's important to know is that for every hour a student uses these beyond access support services weekly, their GPA increases. Going on up that pyramid, we get to an even smaller subset of colleges that, while being traditional colleges, within them have a structured learning support program. Now, these programs may be designed for a wide range of learning differences or for something very specific, like for students who have ADHD or students who are on the autism spectrum. These are much more comprehensive forms of support for students. It's also good to be aware that many of them operate on a service fee kind of structure. So it's like looking at an a la carte dinner menu. For every service you use, there will be an accompanying fee. Important thing to be aware of upfront. And finally, we get to the top of the pyramid, and it's at the point because there are so few. These are programs, post-secondary programs, and only 2 colleges designed exclusively for students who have learning differences. These have, well, the colleges I should mention are Landmark in Putney, Vermont, and Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida. All accommodations and beyond access services are actually embedded or built in to the natural teaching, the universal design, and the entire functioning of the institution. So these are the most comprehensive programs of support. Both of these colleges are also very small, and because of that, offer very personalized scaffolding for their students, while at the same time offering a completely traditional curriculum, a liberal arts curriculum that's rigorous and unmodified. As important as knowing what services are going to be provided is knowing who is going to be providing them. In the majority of cases, services are going to be provided by a peer tutor who is a content expert or a member of the faculty. While they are expert in the material, chances are very small that they've had any specialized training to teach unique learners. In fact, it's only about in 5% of the cases that students will be receiving services from somebody who is a specialist, somebody who has been trained to do that. That's not always necessary, but a good deal of the time it is really beneficial to have somebody who understands learning differences providing the services. So before I go on, I want to take a moment, Christina, and ask you, have there been any questions in the chat that I can answer at
There's
this juncture?
no questions so far, Fern. This is great. Thank you.
Sure. So just remember, you get a break from hearing me give you fact after fact if you put some questions in the chat. So I encourage you to do that. But on now to how the legal landscape changes, and it changes a great deal from high school to college. In high school, the services that students receive are mandated by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. When a student is in college, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, takes the lead on mandating support while Section 504 continues to be in play. But more than knowing what specific laws are going to govern the services that a student receives, it's important to just understand the impact. So K to 12, all students are guaranteed a free and appropriate public education. The school district is responsible for student success, and so they are responsible for identifying students who might need these services, providing the evaluations that are required, and for paying the cost of these evaluations. Based on the results, a team at the school comes together and creates either an IEP or a 504 plan for the student. A plan in which, by the way, parents, and I assume some of you are parents, and so you know this, a plan in which parents can be involved both in the original creation and the ongoing refinement and development of the plan year after year. While IEPs require formal transition plans for students who are who have that kind of a plan. Uh, 504 plans do not have the same requirement, which I think is unfortunate because transition planning can be key to helping students thrive after high school. By the time a student gets to college, they need to first and foremost understand their learning difference, but also be able to articulate it, to talk about the services they received, what worked, what didn't work. They need to articulate what they are asking for in college. It's made very much easier by the confidence a student gains during that formal transition planning in high school. So, what about students who are on 504 plans, as many are? You may not be able to get the school to do formal transition planning for you, although some schools will do that regardless of the law. But if you cannot, there are a couple things that will help you. Make sure that your 504 plan is really specific and in writing, something that, again, the law doesn't require. Make sure that the accommodations you received are very specifically noted and the accommodations that you will be needing in college. The other piece of this is whether you are on an IEP or a 504 plan, ask to take the leadership role in your meetings, in your plan meetings while you're in high school. Many high schools already encourage students to do that. But the experience of doing that, the experience of advocating for yourself, speaking for yourself, will give you the confidence you need when you get to college. So on to college. The ADA, again, prevents discrimination on the basis of a disability. However, it's about access once you get to college. Colleges are not mandated to ensure that you succeed. So the college bears no responsibility. Students must self-identify. They must provide proof of the disability, whatever documentation it is that the particular school requires. And most significantly, I think, because students by the time they get to college are mostly over 18, you students are considered an adults at that point. And parents cannot be involved. That is such a big change. And that's why you need to get comfortable advocating for yourself before you get to college.
And Fern, I'll chime in real quickly with that.
Thank you.
That I would say from my perspective or our perspective as educational consultants working with families navigating this process, that piece, what you just said, is one of the big shocks I think for a lot of families is that the one that those services are not a guarantee, but also the fact that once they're there, a lot of that communication, what they're used to, a lot of those processes, a lot of the hand holding, it either goes away completely depending on the institution, or it takes a lot of effort to figure out how to find the right people on campus, again depending on the institution, which actually leads me to a question that was put in the chat that I thought I'd throw in right now. You mentioned earlier about the different tiers of support, tiers of
Mhm.
support. So is there a comprehensive resource that you would suggest families can use to identify what levels of services universities have and where to find a list of some sort of schools that do support students who learn differently in a very good way?
So there are multiple layers of doing this, and some of how a student or family will approach it will depend on what they are most comfortable with. The K and W guide, which is probably about 5 or 6 inches thick, is considered the premier resource. However, for somebody like me, and I don't think I'm alone, in a volume that large, there are so many schools listed that I don't find it to be a good starting place. It's a good place to follow up on other leads that you have. I think the internet is a great place to start because you can put in all kinds of searches like best colleges for students with ADHD, best colleges for students who are on the spectrum, and you will get incredible amounts of information in that way. Your educational consultants can be a source of great information. They've had this experience. School counselors and college advisors. So there are multiple ways of reaching out to get this information. Ultimately, you want to find yourself on the website of these various colleges. And some of the things I look for are how easy or hard it is to find anything about disability services at all. There are some websites that I find it really, really challenging to get any information from at all. And while you could continue to pursue it in other ways, if it's not readily available, I'm wary from the very beginning. But for my personal learning style, I like to start with the internet and then expand from that to more specific sources. Christina, do you have any other wisdom on that?
I think those were really great suggestions. I will in a second. You referenced, the K&W guide that eventually that might be a good resource for somebody to take a look at, maybe not as the initial search, but something to look at after they've already begun the process. I'll put a link to what that is in the chat for everybody. But I think your recommendations are very good. I think, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, you might be getting to this about the right questions to ask, when they're looking at school. So I'm not going to jump into that right now because I'm guessing that that's part of this. But that I think is a very significant piece of figuring out, is this a school that can actually support my child's needs? So I'll let you continue on, Fern, because like I said, I know you're going to hit that.
Yeah, and you're right. I will absolutely hit that. And that's probably the advantage of sending you my slides early on, so you would know.
There
But
you go.
so making that transition, how do you do it? How do you make it smooth? Transitions are challenging for lots of us. And I think for lots of students, neurodiverse or neurotypical, that transition from high school to college can be really challenging. So step one is the kind of transition planning that I was talking about. It's interesting for me to note too that we see that where transition plans are really specific in terms of naming the accommodations students have been receiving and what they will need in college, uh, it makes the students more likely not just to access those services, but actually to keep utilizing them, because that's another piece of the challenge once students get to college, is to continue to use these services that will support them. But beyond transition planning, finding a good college match is really key to a smooth transition too. So that match means understanding what you need, want, and expect from your college years. Remember that inner journey I keep referring to. And once you figure that out, aligning those factors with what a college offers, and more importantly, what they deliver. Remember, always access impacts success. Now, to be able to access these accommodations and services, you need to disclose. And yet, very often when I'm talking to students and families, the question comes up, do I disclose? And if I disclose, when do I disclose? And I find it interesting to examine the reasons that a student might not want to disclose. For many students, their self-identity has been really wrapped up with their learning disability throughout their education. They want the opportunity to break out from that when they get to college and to establish an identity that's completely independent of their disability status. Another reason is that shame or fear that I've already talked about. Fear of being perceived by your peers as lazy or less intelligent, but also some fear when you're getting accommodations that peers may think that you're getting an unfair advantage. Students may also be afraid of the kinds of responses they'll get from faculty. I personally find it really shocking that some educators continue to believe that the things we call learning or attention issues are really laziness on the part of students. I mean, so misguided, so wrong, and yet there are educators who still believe that. Part of why students don't disclose is they don't know what services are available to them, how to access them. Not all colleges make it easy to figure those things out. But I think many students, unfortunately, don't disclose because they underestimate just how important accommodations are to their success. A couple of things regarding that. Many students believe that they have outgrown their learning difference, and yet we know the science tells us that learning differences are brain-based. We don't outgrow those differences. What we do um, is we find skills and strategies that enable us to successfully meet the challenges, but we don't outgrow them. But in addition to that, college is more challenging on every single level. It's not just the rigor of the coursework. The demands in terms of executive function skill, the ability to plan, to organize. You know, students get from high school where every moment of their day in school was planned to college where they may be in a class a relatively small percentage of the week. If you have 4 classes and they meet 3 times a week, maybe an hour and a half each time, all of a sudden there are these big demands for how you manage time, how you balance play and work, study and recreation. So it is really key for students who learn differently to understand just how important these services are to their success. And as a result, I always recommend that you disclose early in the application process because that gives you your best opportunity to evaluate not just the college's services, but the attitudes of the college. Admissions should be able to tell you a great deal about the services the college that can provide for the student, but it also should be really easy to make an appointment to talk with disability services, and I recommend that you always do that. You want to see how easy or hard it's going to be to access the services that ensure student success. And a side benefit, by the way, is that GPAs are higher for students who disclose early.
Can I add something there, Fern?
Of
So
course.
one of the things that I think has become an interesting trend that I've noticed on my end working with students is that I have seen more students feel comfortable disclosing even in an essay, for example, where they're discussing a challenge they've overcome or something along those lines, or even a simple essay prompt asking to share a bit more about who they are. I've seen more students feeling less hesitant about sharing that information openly versus even 5, 10 years ago, where I feel like many of students, to your point, were very concerned about sharing anything like that for fear of that would be an immediate knock against them in the admission process. And I will say I've myself have worked on the admission side as well. And I can assure students, if you're watching, that that is not something that admission officers should be using against you in the process. And in fact, it's an opportunity, like Fern said, for them to be able to share more about how they can support you if they can. And if they can't, it's an opportunity for them to share that as well. So I think that that's an important thing to know.
I love that trend, by the way, Christina. I think it's great that students are feeling more comfortable sharing. And I don't think colleges ever use that as a way of disqualifying a student. But by the way, because some students are concerned about that, I would also say that if a college did not want to admit you because of your learning difference, is it really a place you would want to be? Because that's not a college that is going to provide what you need to succeed. So, but I'm glad that the trend is reversing and that people don't seem to have the same desire to keep that uh, hidden during the admissions process. So you're going to have an opportunity to evaluate colleges. You're in the driver's seat. You want to evaluate these different colleges that you're exploring. So the first thing, identify the services you need, both through the inner journey and through reviewing your IEP or 504 plan. And it's really a great idea to review that plan, because what you may find is that there are services and accommodations that you're no longer using and you don't need. But make a list of students, what you think that you will need. Have a discussion in your 504 or your IEP meeting. And then also, because none of us are totally capable of seeing ourselves objectively, compare what you think your needs are, students, with what parents, counselors, teachers, educational consultants, all the people who know you best, ask them what they think you need. Then start your investigation. Explore college websites, explore the web in general, and look at two kinds of services, not just disability services, but there are universally available services at every college, things like the Academic Support Center. You will be using both specific disability services and these universal services, so explore all of them fully. If you want more information, go beyond the website to calling or emailing admissions or disability services. And during that exploration, investigation phase, I also encourage you to find out where disability services is located on the college campus. On many college campuses, it's located far outside the physical mainstream. And if it is not in a place that you frequent, if it is a place that is challenging or inconvenient to get to, students are less likely to keep utilizing the services that they do access. The Landmark College Institute for Research and Training has created this disability services evaluation worksheet that I'm happy to email to anybody who wants it. And it gives you a chance to track your findings about each of the colleges that you'll be exploring, so you're not dependent on your memory. So you can track the name of the team, the name of the department that will be serving you. It's not always called disability services. You can track the level of support this particular college or university will provide, what the office hours are, so you know how available services are, the number of staff, specific services that are offered. And then you can do some reflection and think about the pros, the cons, and any other notes you want to make on the institution. And finally, rate them between 1 and 5 stars. So if this is, again, something that you think would be useful, I'm happy to provide it. Remember that the process of evaluating accommodations is an ongoing process. It's not a one and done. Students, you will be in a position to continue to advocate for yourself semester after semester, professor after professor. Meet regularly to discuss the effectiveness of your accommodations with whoever the appropriate person at the college is, whether that's an advisor or somebody from disability services. Your disability will manifest differently, perhaps in different classes and at different points in your life. So it's important that you keep monitoring the extent to which the content of the courses is accessible to you. And if you at any point find that your access is diminished, it's important to begin that self-advocacy once again. So the services are absolutely critical as you're evaluating different institutions, but there's more to consider than the services. Student life and campus connectedness, another very important facet of college life. What is the culture of the college? Is it inclusive? Is it welcoming? Will you feel supported as a student with learning differences? And what is student life like? So small a percentage of a student's time is actually spent in classes. What other opportunities will be offered to you to either explore other things that you're already interested in, but also to develop new interests. So student life is another important piece to take a look at for all students. The availability of social pragmatic support, really important for students who are on the spectrum. A college that is a compliance only level of support, is only providing accommodations, is unlikely to provide that kind of support, but other institutions have varying levels, some of them very great levels of support for students on the spectrum. Mental health services, even when you find a great college match, uh, it can be really important to have access to counseling. College, many students are living away from home for the very first time, making certain kinds of decisions independently for the first time, and in some cases, experiencing the consequences of decisions that they make. All of this happens even again in a college that's a great fit. But we are living in a world, I think, that's been forever changed by COVID-19. So it's important to think about um, that impact on all of us, but on students in particular. Many students have uh, given up, have lost their end of high school rituals. We are all dealing with a kind of collective trauma, and these students are dealing with loss and have a very understandable anxiety about what's to come. So the availability of mental health services can be really crucial. At Landmark, 60% of our students utilize uh, counseling services for some portion of every semester. And finally, COVID-19 itself is something to put into the thought process as you're considering colleges. We're seeing a light, I think, at the end of the tunnel, but still at some point in time, it might be necessary to go back to remote learning. And if that's the case, what provisions has the college made? Uh, how will content be delivered? Will it be in live virtual classrooms where students can continue to interact with one another and their faculty? That's something that we learned was incredibly important uh, during the switch to remote learning a year ago. Students did far better in that live classroom. Will support services continue to be provided if students are learning remotely? One of the impacts of COVID is that colleges have not met their uh, admissions projections, which means that they haven't made their budgetary expectations either. So some services and programs are on the chopping block. Make sure that the services you need are not in danger because of the budgetary constrictions created by COVID-19. Also be aware of what provisions colleges have made for keeping students connected to their community. Another really important piece of what can make remote learning tenable is keeping students feeling connected to their college community. So as Christina indicated, there are so many questions to ask as you are exploring these colleges. And there are many more than I have fit on this page, as many as there are right in front of you here. Many of them I've already talked about, but some of the ones I want to focus on are, can students take a reduced course load? That can be really an incredible benefit for students who have executive function challenges and can ease the transition. Are there services both in and out of the classroom? Are services one-to-one or in a group? In some cases, group support is totally appropriate, but in others, customized one-to-one assistance is of even greater benefit. What is the student to support specialist ratio on campus? Who does the advising for students who have learning differences? What documentation is required? I referred to that earlier. In fewer than 50% of colleges and universities is an IEP or a 504 plan appropriate or considered a standalone documentation and proof of a disability. Most colleges require fairly recent documentation. The general rule is within 3 years, though there are exceptions. And some colleges require that the data on this testing be normed for adults, not on a K-12 basis. Is the college test optional, if that's important to you? A really important question. The good news is more and more colleges are test optional, in part because of COVID, but I think that there are certain changes made because of COVID that that are going to persist beyond this time. Many colleges recognize that standardized testing is not always an accurate way of identifying whether a student is going to succeed in a college environment. If that is important to you, make sure you know up front. And finally, what are the college's retention, graduation, and placement rates for students who learn differently? Christina, are there any questions I didn't ask that you think are particularly important?
Yes, I actually have one just based on that last point that you just made. Is that information about the retention, graduation, and placement rates for the students with diagnosed learning differences, is that most easily accessible through the Office of Disability Services? Or I've not run into that information, or and perhaps I just didn't know to ask in the admission office, but I wonder if it's actually somewhere else on campus that they should be asking for that information.
In general, I would look for that information in admissions because that's a question that comes up for families. And so admissions is usually armed with all the data that the college has. So if the college has that data, you'll find it, I think, in admissions.
And another thing I would just mention when you talk about the testing piece of it is one question that we often get is for those students who have taken some kind of test, ACT or SAT with accommodations. Oftentimes families have a concern that somehow the colleges may see that they've received extended time. And so I just want to make sure that families know that that is no, there was a time when you could see that on the test report on the admission side. That is no longer the case. There's nothing that indicates the student has had extended time or any kind of accommodations on their testing. And like Ferne said, one of the silver linings, I think, of COVID, if there are any, is the fact that many schools have become test optional or even test blind, that are no longer requiring the test for students applying. And so that is, I think, has been a benefit for a lot of our students who have struggled in this space. So many schools have already announced that for the coming year as well. And just as a resource for everyone watching and listening, there is a website, fairtest.org, that has the most current list of those schools. So if you are looking to see which schools are test optional, you can certainly look at that resource. So thank you, Ferne.
Are there any questions, by the way, in the chat? I haven't asked that lately.
The only question was about receiving the checklist you shared earlier. So I'll just say, if you in the chat, because the chat just comes to Ferne and I, if you're interested in receiving that, you could certainly put your email address there. I can also put Ferne's email address. I'm sure she wouldn't mind if I put her email address into the chat. So if anyone has questions after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to her. She's a wealth of information, obviously, as you're seeing through this discussion. But a quick question, Ferne, is this slide, I think this slide is really great too. I don't know if this is available or if folks would be able to access this list somewhere as well.
You know what I will do, Christina? I will send you a PDF of this whole presentation.
Perfect. Okay.
And then everybody will have everything, and I'll send the separate checklist because it doesn't print that well out of the presentation, but I'll send the checklist separately. And then, and again, yes, please email me, reach out to me. I'm happy to meet one-on-one with any of you, and I'm happy to be a resource in whatever form you would like that to be.
Perfect.
So the other part of finding a college match is the college visit. And something that isn't happening too much right now because a lot of colleges are closed to in-person visits. But it is an important piece of this exploration. And here's another of what I would call a silver lining. If you were going to visit a number of colleges, you would probably limit the number of places you were going to take a trip to visit. But because everybody is doing virtual visits right now, there is really very little limit other than your patience on how many colleges you want to visit. So Visit large and small, urban and rural, visit traditional colleges, visit colleges that have a structured program, visit a landmark or beacon so you get a sense of what a college is like that's completely for neurodiverse students. Attend open houses. You know, all of us have become incredibly creative when you have to resort to this virtual platform. So you will have an opportunity in these open houses to hear from faculty, to hear from staff. Uh, Very frequently, there are live parent panels where you'll get to ask questions, those of you who are parents. There are student panels too, which I think is one of the most powerful things to experience as you're checking out these colleges. At Landmark, we even sometimes provide demonstration classes for students who want to experience the way that we teach at Landmark. After you have participated in any kind of virtual experience, don't be afraid to ask for more. So if you are a student who wants to talk to another student with similar interests to you or a similar profile, ask admissions to connect you to a student. Parents, if you want to talk to parents of current students, don't be afraid to ask. You know, we are making all of those kinds of connections available readily, easily, because we understand how important it is for people to get a real experience of the college, even if they can't be there in person. The question comes up, what if college isn't the best next step? And it isn't always. Um, if you think that it is not the right next step, if the student hasn't developed a level of independent living skills, isn't academically independent enough, explore transition programs. They may offer, they generally offer more services outside the classroom, yet they often also partner with a nearby college, university, or tech program to provide an academic component. But they may offer more in the way of life skill development, money management, counseling, life coaching, occupational therapies. Also, gap years are wonderful things to explore. I think students who have struggled throughout their education, students who learn differently often have, may be ready for an academic break after high school. So there are any number of structured gap year programs that you can explore on the internet, that you can explore um, with a counselor at school. I bet Christina is aware of a lot of these gap year programs as well. But there are also things like travel, volunteering, job internships, and training. In terms of the way the colleges look at these kinds of gap years, be aware that if it is one that provided the student a real opportunity for growth, we look at it as a plus because students who come to us after those kinds of experiences are more mature, more ready, are self-motivated. Uh, they make very ideal college students and they come when they're ready. So don't be afraid that that could be a negative in the eyes of a college.
Can I ask a quick question, Fern? Is
Sure.
it is it common, and maybe you can just speak for Landmark, or unless you know the answer for multiple institutions, but for a place like Landmark, is it common for a student to apply to the institution and then request a deferment so that they can take a gap year, or do they typically take that gap year and then apply during the course of that year while they're off?
It is better to apply and then defer. And the reason is there is everything in school supports applying when you are a senior. You have the aid of counselors, college advisors. The whole system is set up to support seniors. And the next year, those same staff are going to be supporting the new seniors. And I think it's just more challenging to get the GPAs and the test scores and everything that you might want sent over. The important caveat here is that while that is generally the advice for all institutions, you need to make sure that a particular institution will defer and that they will defer for as long as you want your gap year to be.
And that's a really good point because not all institutions do allow gap years. I should say that. Actually, a lot of students are finding that out right now as they're getting their admission decisions and potentially considering a gap year. So someone asked the question about a resource for a listing of gap year programs. I will put into the chat a link to an organization called the Gap Year Association that actually has a listing of accredited gap year programs. I will say, just as a sidebar, is that this is not an inclusive list. These are programs that are accredited through the Gap Year Association. So a good starting point, but you could certainly find other gap year programs that are not part of this, and potentially even gap year programs that are specific for students with diagnosed learning differences, for example, as well as programs like transition programs. I'm not sure, Fern, if you know of a specific source or resource where someone might be able to find a listing of some of those transition programs. I mean, I'm familiar with a few, like college internship program and things like that, but do you know of a resource for those transition programs?
I actually don't. It's a great question, but for me, I the internet is so vast and will have exactly what you need. So you can make your search as specific as you want it to be. It could be transition programs for students with ADHD or students who are on the spectrum. That's one of the resources. And then, the school, either the guidance office or the college counselor, they're very aware of these programs too. So um, that's how I would advise searching for them.
Yeah, and I would say, and to your point, Fern, I think one of the things, I'll just put a warning out. When you're searching for this kind of information and you're Googling it, I would steer clear of things, I call them with my students, the gossipy sites like College Confidential and things like that, where there's certainly maybe valuable information on occasion, but in terms of a legitimate resource, you really want to find for example, the websites of the transition programs where you can see information about their outcomes, and you can always ask for references from those organizations or those programs to see if you can speak with someone who's gone through that program. I think that's really important to know. Someone asked a question, Fern, in the chat about deferment. If someone defers to do this and they have applied for accommodations and already gone through that process, for example, with a place like Landmark, do they have to reapply for that kind of thing when they come to the school, or is that it just
You know
carries
what?
along?
That's a great question. And that's something I can only speak to Landmark, but that gives you another question to ask at any institution. But at Landmark, because support and accommodations are embedded, you are not specifically going through a process to get that. So you don't need to do anything over again after you defer. I don't know what that looks like at other institutions. Do you, Christina?
I don't. I would say that typically I tell students, if they're deferring, a lot of what they might be doing from if they defer when they actually go through the enrollment process in the year that they're planning to actually go to campus, they may have to do a lot of things again that they had already done. But again, like you said, Fern, that's a good question to ask, is what all do I have to repeat? What will I have to do again if I take this gap year? There was one more question, if I can throw it in real quick in the chat, is if for schools like colleges like Landmark, Fern, do you have people on your staff at Landmark that participate in the CSE meetings at the high school to help with transition planning for students that are planning to come to Landmark? Or is there anyone that serves as a liaison in that kind of a role for a student planning to head off to, like I said, a place like Landmark?
We are the sense in which we participate in schools is the traditional college visit that all colleges do. And depending on the desires of the particular high school, they can call us in to provide more in the way of transition help and preparing students. It really is up to the schools, and some call on us to do that and some don't. We also, by the way, because we have the Landmark College Institute for Research and Training embedded in the campus, they train educators throughout the world. So some schools call in staff from LSERT to help their professionals, to help their staff prepare students for transition.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
That's all the questions right now. So go
Okay.
ahead.
Thank you all for these questions. So we have gotten to that place where I have finished with the general information I wanted to provide, and I want to talk really specifically about Landmark and what that looks like. Landmark is exclusively for students who learn differently, so our students may have diagnoses of language-based disabilities like dyslexia. They may have ADHD and executive function challenges. They may be on the spectrum. We are known for the kind of comprehensive support we provide while maintaining a rigorous traditional liberal arts curriculum. But at the same time, Landmark is really known for providing an extraordinary education as well to our students. We're pretty proud of the fact that US News and World Reports for the second year in a row has named Landmark to the top spot in 2 categories, Most Innovative College and Best Undergrad Teaching, both in Regional Colleges North, the category that we're ranked in. So some fast facts. We are located in Putney, Vermont. That is, if you're not familiar, the southeastern tip of Vermont, not too far from Massachusetts and not too far from New Hampshire. We have 125 self-contained acres, both open land and woodlands where our students like to hike and bike and generally de-stress. We are small, very intentionally small. We have about 450 students from 38 different states and 12 different countries. We have a 6-to-1 student to faculty ratio, pretty extraordinary, but more extraordinary is what that translates to in terms of class size. The average class is between 8 and 12 students, so really deeply personal education. We have 10 associate's and bachelor's degree programs, a range of concentrations. For our 450 students, we have 209 faculty and staff, again, very personal. We have more than 36 clubs, intercollegiate and intramural athletic programs and outdoor recreation options. 50%, 1 in 2, is a statistic that I always feel personally a little sad about. 50% of our students are and continue to be transfer students, students who did not find a good college fit in their first experience and who are looking for a better fit in Landmark. But that 65%, that's the really good news. You may remember the statistics I quoted early after starting in the evening. Less than 60% of all students and 34% of neurodiverse students succeed nationwide in getting the bachelor's degree that they're seeking. At Landmark, students who stay at least through an associate's degree, 65% go on to successfully earn their bachelor's degree. So that's something I'm particularly proud of. We like to talk about Landmark as a place with a lot of on and off ramps. Again, very intentional, because we want there to be different paths to meet the different objectives of our students. So we have short-term opportunities and we have degree programs. We start working with students while they're still in high school. We offer online high school dual enrollment, which gives high school juniors and seniors on a college prep track the opportunity to earn 3 transferable credits, but more than that, to work with faculty who understand neurodiverse learners. All programs at Landmark, whether they're short-term or whether they're a degree program, we talk about there being a hidden curriculum. And that is the development of skills, strategies, self-awareness, self-advocacy, executive function, all of those skills that help a student prepare to move on to another situation, be that another college, be that a traditional college, or into the workplace as well. So this hidden curriculum is extremely important. Other short-term programming at Landmark includes summer programming, the high school program that Erin was a part of that helps students again develop skills and strategies, a writing class that helps students uh, start to work on a college statement while they are examining what it's like to live on a residential campus, to live and study at Landmark in particular. During the school year, we also have a bridge experience for students, an intensive semester or 2 semesters, very specifically focused on strategy and skill development to prepare them to transfer to another institution. We have a transition at college program for undergrads who particularly want a slower transition to college while they focus on building executive functioning skills. Some students use our associate's degree as a short-term program too. It's not just for students whose major we don't have at Landmark, it's also for students who want to spread their wings. You know, we are good at helping students develop the confidence that they have what they need to succeed in any college environment. So we fully support them if they want to move on to finish their bachelor's degree at another institution. Perspectives in Learning is a cornerstone class at Landmark. It's a foundational class in which students research their diagnosis, study their own testing, so they develop greater and greater self-awareness while building skills and strategies that enable their success in academia and beyond as well. The community at Landmark is something that first really called out to me while Erin was in school. When you get a campus of 400 or so students who are all working on some kind of challenge, what you have is a campus that is inclusive, supportive, welcoming, a campus in which there is no stigma, in which nobody is on the outside looking in. I like to joke that, you know, in many colleges, there's a mainstream and there's outside the mainstream. At Landmark, there's just a stream and everybody is swimming in it together. The Landmark College Institute for Research and Training, we are really lucky to have that embedded in the campus. They are on the cutting edge of research that's transforming the way neurodiverse students are taught and naturally at the same time transforming the outcomes. They also provide an opportunity for students to participate in this research and not as subjects, as researchers. Right now, with funding from the National Science Foundation, Landmark students are developing a virtual reality education game designed to expand access to STEM for students who are on the spectrum. So some really exciting opportunities. The foundation at the core of Landmark is the belief that neurodiversity is a strength, and our Center for Neurodiversity highlights that strength. You know, our students very often refer to their learning difference as their superpower. Neurodiversity is a paradigm that acknowledges and accepts different ways of thinking and acting as a normal part of human variations. Uh, it's the diversity and inclusion perspective broadened to encompass things like autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, and other invisible disabilities. So we are really excited that we have such a center on the campus. We also have centers for diversity and inclusion, a center for women and gender, the Rise Up Center for students of color and those who want to support and advocate for them. We have the Stonewall Center for our LGBTQA students. For all the ways that I talk about Landmark as being unique, it's really important to understand that we're also really a very traditional college campus in the ways that matter. College, whether you're a student or the parent of a student, you want to be a full and rich experience. So we have sports, a state-of-the-art soccer field. We have speaker series, clubs, social events, trips off campus, all the things you would expect to exist at any college, on any campus, exist also at Landmark, including study abroad, led by our own faculty, led by our own staff. Um, these are 3-week trips. Students earn 3 or 4 credits for the experience. They happen during winter and summer breaks. At bottom left is a photograph a student took on a trip we very frequently do to Japan. It is an art class. A year ago, January, right before everything shut down, we had students in the Caribbean, one cohort of students learning to sail a ship, while another group of students was in London on an immersive theater experience. Perhaps the study abroad trip that I most long to go on is the one pictured bottom right. We have students that go to Botswana to participate in a rhino and lion conservation project. So broad range of opportunities and experiences available to Landmark students. More specifically, what does support look like? So support is wraparound, fully integrated, embedded right in the very fabric of the institution. There are no additional fees for supports. It all starts for us with the advisor. Students come onto campus and immediately begin meeting on a weekly basis, every week, with their advisor, at least through their entire first year. That advisor is taking them through an advising curriculum, can also be an executive function coach. They are all trained to do that if a student wants that kind of coaching. And we look at the advisor as the conductor of the orchestra. The advisor can also point the student towards other forms of support if the student isn't already utilizing them. So there is the Drake Center for Academic Support. As I mentioned before, all colleges have a support center. What distinguishes Landmark is that one-to-one services of all kind are performed by faculty, specially trained people who know how to teach students who are unique learners. There are special centers in business, computer science, science and math. There is writing support, reading and study skills. There is support for students who simply want help focusing, want to stay on task, help for students who want to initiate their homework. There is additional executive function coaching available in the Drake Center. We offer students educational technology if that will help them access their curriculum, voice to text, text readers, planning technology, and support for that is also available in the Drake Center. All of our students have access to a counselor, to health services. Residential services exist in every dorm. There's a residential director and student RAs. We have an incredible therapy dog program, 9 certified dogs on campus who can be found with their handlers all across campus, but they also have office hours. So if students want some one-on-one time with a dog, they can have that as well. Support services for students on the spectrum, social pragmatic support services are extraordinary at Landmark. And if anybody has a question about what that looks like, please put it in the chat and I'll go into that in detail. But last and not least, career connections is a really important part of what we do at Landmark. It's not enough to give students a degree. We need to be preparing students for their lives after Landmark. So Career Connections is the team that will provide transition help for students who want to transfer, but also provides specific career-related opportunities, training, internships, and all kinds of programming tied to neurodiversity. They've created relationships with employers throughout the world. We have codified agreements with JP Morgan Chase, Ernst & Young, Dell, Hasbro, just to name a few. These companies come to campus to first learn what it means to create a workplace that is supportive of, productive for, and welcoming to a neurodiverse workforce, which they are actively seeking, by the way. They also offer our students internships and are providing career opportunities for students as well. So that's another important piece of, of the way we prepare neurodiverse students for life after college. The college journey can be a stressful time, but it's also, I really want to say, a very, very exciting time. So those of you who are parents, those of you who are students, if there are any joining us tonight, enjoy the exploration, enjoy the journey. I wish you all the best. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides now and return to an opportunity, a last opportunity to ask questions of Christina and of me. Anybody?
Anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But in the meantime, I just wanted to say thank you to you, Ferne, for taking the time to very succinctly explain a lot of this process. I know there's much more depth involved in an individual students' needs. And so I think that that's where, having these conversations with folks like you or with like our team about the process and what it entails is really important. I did, just so that everyone knows, if you didn't notice, I did put the Landmark website in the chat as well as Ferne's email address. Please feel free to reach out to her. We will be, as I mentioned at the beginning, we will be having webinars frequently on a variety of different topics. And so I did put in the chat also a link to our Estrella Consulting e-newsletter so that you can stay up to date on those kinds of events that we might be having, and then lots of good information that we share twice a month in that e-newsletter. So, but if there's no other questions, I don't see any other ones. It was a lot of good ones came in during the course of the event. So again, Ferne, thank you so much for being so gracious with your time tonight and sharing this information, both as, again, an educational professional and a parent. And again, I think that means a lot for the people participating. So thanks everybody for attending. And this is on, this has been playing on our Estrella Consulting Facebook page. It will also be on our YouTube channel. So if you want to rewatch any of this or take advantage of any of the information that you heard tonight, please feel free to watch it there. There's a question about the slides in the handout. Yes, you can either put your email address in the chat if you'd like the slides emailed to you. We are happy to do that. Ferne will send them along. You can also reach out directly to Ferne if you've got questions, and she can share that information with you. But if you have an interest in receiving a copy of the presentation slides or anything like that, please just put your email address in the chat. It will come to Ferne and I, and we will make sure to get those things sent to you. Any other questions that we can answer for anybody before we let you all go for the evening? I think that's it, Ferne. I don't see any other questions coming in. Well, thank you again. I'm going to go ahead and save these email addresses that have just come in. And thank you. And everybody have a wonderful evening and take care. Thanks so
And
much.
thank you, Christina. Thank you
Yeah,
for making this possible. And thank you all for joining us. So
of course. All right. Thank you. Have a good night. Bye,
good
everybody.
night.